Thunder rolled over the palace roofs like an omen. The sky wept, heavy and unrelenting. Inside the grand hall, the air was thick with mourning. Nobles dressed in black silk bowed their heads as the priestess's chant echoed between the pillars. Each word was a farewell, low, rhythmic, ancient. Upon the cold slab of moonstone, Kael Ardyn, the Alpha King of the Northern Dominion, lay still. His skin had lost its fire. The veins that once carried fury and command now ran quiet beneath pale flesh. His fiery green eyes that always held rage now closed forever. His tousled midnight hair that's always in a bun, now loose and framing his face. A crown of iron and gems rested beside him, heavy with silence. Behind the veil of tears and ritual, Queen Verean watched. Her face was carved into sorrow, her eyes glistening, but her lips, barely visible beneath her hood, curved with satisfaction. Only one other person saw it, the faintest ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. At the far end of the hall, pressed against the bronze doors, Liora trembled. The scent of incense burned her throat. She wasn't supposed to be here. No Omega slave dared enter the king's court, not even to clean its floors on a day of mourning. But she had to see. Her heart pounded, wild and defiant, as the priestess raised her hands toward the heavens. The crowd repeated the chant in one voice, a sea of grief and duty. "Return, O Alpha, to the land of the forgotten. Rest among the stars of your fathers." Leora's hands curled into fists at her sides. No. Her chest ached with the truth clawing to escape. He wasn't gone. She had seen his pulse, faint, whispering beneath his skin. She had heard the softest tremor of breath when they carried him through the corridor. The Alpha King was not dead. She could still feel the warmth of life as they laid him down. Something deep within her, a light she had long buried, had stirred then, flickering to life like a candle starved for air. The rain outside turned violent, slamming against the windows as if the heavens themselves refused to accept this death. Leora's voice caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to tear through the lies echoing in this hall, but she was only an Omega, of the lowest rank too. No one would hear her. No one ever did. Her gaze darted to Verean standing beside Raiden, the king's beta. They shared a look, not grief, not loss, but recognition, victory. And in that instant, fear turned to fire inside Leora's chest. Her mother's words came back to her. "There is power in your silence, Liora, but there are times when silence kills." As the priestess lifted the final blessing, the doors behind Liora groaned under the storm's weight. She drew a shaky breath, fingers tightening on her soaked skirt. If no one would speak for the truth, she would. Before the priestess could lower her hands, Leora's voice, thin but fierce, cut through the hall. "He is not dead." Every head turned. Gasps rippled through the court like wind through flame. Liora stood trembling at the entrance, rainwater dripping from her hair, her eyes bright with terror and defiance. "The Alpha King is alive," she said again, this time louder, clearer, unstoppable. And for the first time in centuries, a lowly Omega had silenced the royal court. The nobles stared, their faces pale beneath the candlelight. The priestess stopped mid-chant, her mouth open, and through the thunder that rattled the windows, Liora could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears. Her words hung in the air like a curse. "He is not dead." Guards surged toward her, boots echoing against marble. But as they seized her arms, the world began to blur, the scent of incense fading, the sound of rain distant, until she was back in the memory of that day in the market. The sun had been golden that afternoon, spilling light over the crowded stalls. Liora had slipped away from the servant quarters to buy herbs for her mother's failing cough. She had loved the marketplace, the clatter, the colour, the laughter. People there didn't look at her with the disgust reserved for Omegas in the palace. Here, she was simply the girl with bright eyes and a basket of wildflowers. Her favourite was Old Man Erim, the herb seller. He always saved her the best routes, smiling through his few remaining teeth. "You've got a healer's hands, little Liora," he'd say. "Gentle hands make stubborn herbs listen." She had laughed at him that day, but then his smile had faltered. His fingers trembled as he reached for the counter. Before anyone could move, his eyes rolled back and his body crumpled like a cloth sack. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted for help. Liora dropped to her knees beside him. His chest barely rose. She could smell the bitter tang of fever on his breath. She pressed her palm to his heart, whispering prayers she didn't fully believe. "Aram, please don't go," she murmured. And then something inside her shifted. A warmth bloomed under her skin, spreading from her chest to her fingertips. It was like touching sunlight. Her palms glowed faintly, golden and trembling, and the air thickened with a strange calm. A gasp rose from the onlookers as Aram coughed, his eyes fluttering open. "You," he whispered hoarsely, looking at her as if she were no longer just a girl. "Child of Velea, blessed with the light." Before Liora could speak, he pressed a withered hand to her wrist. "Hide it," he said. "Your gift will be both your life and your curse." The guard's grip on her arms tightened, dragging her back to the present. She blinked, the memory dissolving into the storm-lit court. Verean's voice rang sharp across the silence. "Who let this Omega into the royal hall?" Liora's breath came fast. "I saw what you did," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "You and Beta Ryden, you plotted with the mate—" The nobles gasped again. Verean's lips curled. "What is this blasphemy? You dare accuse your queen? Someone take this wretch away." But Liora didn't stop. She couldn't. The image burned too vividly in her mind. The night she had crept beyond the servant corridors, drawn by whispers in the dark. It was 2 nights before the king's death. Liora had been returning from the storage cellars when she heard voices behind the tapestry hall. She had leaned closer, breath caught in her throat. "The poison will work swiftly," Ryden had said. "He'll never feel it." "Good," Verean's voice replied, smooth as silk. "By dawn, the throne will be ours." Liora had frozen. The cup, the celebration feast. She'd seen the maid slip something into the wine before, but she thought it was medicine. Now she knew. Her hands had trembled so hard she nearly dropped the tray she carried. She'd hidden behind the tapestry until their footsteps faded. And that was when she decided. She couldn't let him die. Even if he was the man who enslaved her friends and cast them away for a crime they never committed. Even if he never knew her name. But life was sacred. And her gift, her light, was meant to protect it. Now, standing before the court, soaked in rain and fear, Liora felt that same light stir in her chest again, quiet, defiant, alive. "I can prove it," she whispered, meeting the queen's furious gaze. "The Alpha King still breathes." The priestess hesitated. So did the nobles. And through the silence, thunder rolled again, this time like an answer. The silence stretched until it ached. The priestess looked to Queen Verean, uncertain. The queen's face was now pale with the perfect mask of grief, but her eyes, sharp as glass, flickered with something darker. "Let her speak then," Verean said softly, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. "If she believes she can wake my king, then the gods may yet favour us." The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Some bowed their heads in pity for the girl. Others sneered, whispering that madness had taken her. Beta Ryden stepped forward, his voice low and heavy with false sympathy. "Liora Velea, is it?" He said her name as if tasting something bitter. "If your heart drives you to make such claims before the court, then prove them. But know this, if you lie, your life will pay the price." Liora swallowed hard. "I understand." The guards released her reluctantly. The sound of rain filled the silence as she walked forward, each step echoing across the marble floor. Kael lay still on the stone slab, his skin pale as moonlight, his crown resting beside him. She stopped beside him, trembling. His face, still, cold, impossibly beautiful, was nothing like the image she remembered from the court. He had always seemed larger than life, untouchable. Now he looked almost human. The nobles murmured behind her. What can an Omega do? She should be flogged for touching him. Poor thing, she's gone mad. Verean's voice cut through their whispers, smooth and sorrowful. Enough. Let her have this moment. If the gods truly guide her, we shall see. Liora knelt. Her hands hovered over Kael's chest. She could still feel the faint pulse buried deep inside him, the whisper of life she had felt before. But it was fading, slipping away like smoke between her fingers. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please." Not yet. Nothing. The murmurs grew restless. See? Foolish girl. She mocks the dead. Take her away. Liora's eyes filled with tears. The sound of thunder drowned the noise as she pressed both palms to his heart. Valea, she whispered under her breath, the name the old man had called her gift by. Please, hear me. A faint warmth flickered under her skin. Her veins shimmered faintly with light, but then dimmed again, fading like a dying flame. Verean stepped forward, her voice heavy with pity. She's frightened and grieving. Guards. Wait, Ryden interrupted, pretending uncertainty, his hand raised. If this is truly the gods' will, who are we to interfere? Every word was wrapped in mock concern, but his eyes gleamed, hungry for the spectacle. Liora ignored them all. Her body shook as she tried again. The glow returned, brief, fleeting, before vanishing once more. She gasped for air, her strength waning. Come back, she whispered desperately. You are the Alpha. The moon does not abandon its light. Her voice broke. The world tilted around her, but she refused to stop. She leaned forward, trembling, her tears falling onto his lips. The whispers in the hall grew louder now, some in awe, some in disgust. Enough, a noble barked. She defiles his body. Let her be, shouted another. What harm can she do? Liora's chest heaved as she whispered, if life won't answer to my hands, then let it answer to my heart. And with that, she pressed her lips to his. A hush swept through the hall. For a moment, nothing. Only the echo of thunder and the faint scent of incense. Then the air changed. Light, soft and silver, bloomed where their lips met. It spilled like moonlight across the marble, brushing against her cheeks, threading through his hair. Gasps rippled through the hall as the glow deepened, curling around their faces like liquid fire. The nobles stepped back, shielding their eyes. The priestess fell to her knees. Kael's chest rose, once, twice. Then he breathed. The sound broke the world. The priestess dropped her staff. Several nobles cried out. One fainted. Liora pulled away, shaking, her lips still tingling with warmth. The silver light faded from her fingertips, leaving her drained and pale. Verean's voice sliced through the stunned silence. What? What is this? She hissed, her mask slipping. What sorcery have you done? Ryden's expression darkened with false alarm. This isn't healing, he said sharply. It's witchcraft. No mortal can command life and death. She bewitched him, Verean cried, pointing at Liora. Look at his eyes, clouded, cursed. The nobles erupted in shouts. She's a witch! A curse upon the king! Kill her before it spreads! Liora stumbled backward, her vision blurring. She barely heard the words as rough hands grabbed her arms again. Kael's eyelids fluttered, his gaze dazed, confused. But when his eyes found her, something in him stilled, as if his soul recognized the light that had called him back. Who? He murmured faintly. But before Liora could answer, Ryden's command thundered across the hall. Seize the witch! And as the guards dragged her away, the queen let her veil fall, hiding a sneer only the storm could see. The walls of the dungeon sweated with cold. Drips echoed from somewhere deep. counting time in slow, cruel rhythm. Liora lay motionless on the damp floor, her wrists bound in iron. The faint silver shimmer that had once glowed beneath her skin was gone now, swallowed by the darkness. Every breath came heavy, each one scraping her throat raw. Her body felt hollow, emptied of everything except ache. Every beat of her heart reminded her of what she had done. She had brought back a king and lost her freedom. Chains rattled softly nearby. A whisper followed. "Liora." Her mother's voice, soft, trembling, aged by fear. She turned her head weakly. Her mother sat beside her, back against the wall, her thin arms wrapped around herself. The years of servitude had carved her shoulders down to bone. Her hair, once rich brown, now hung dull and tangled over her face. "Mother," Liora rasped. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry. Her mother reached out, brushing dirt from her daughter's cheek with trembling fingers. "Oh, child, what have you done?" Liora closed her eyes, fighting the sting in them. "I saved him," she whispered. "He was dying. I couldn't let him go." Her mother's breath hitched. "You saved him? At what cost?" Her voice broke, low but fierce. "You don't understand the world you live in, Liora. Omegas don't save kings. We serve. We bow. We survive." The words struck deep, sharper than the chains that held her. Above them, faintly, came the muffled echo of music, celebration. The court was feasting again. The Alpha King lived, and the kingdom rejoiced. Liora let out a hollow laugh that sounded more like a sob. "They're cheering for a miracle," she said softly, "while the miracle rots beneath their feet." Her mother flinched, eyes darting toward the barred door. "Quiet. You never know who listens down here." The torchlight outside flickered briefly. Shadows danced across the stone. Liora sank back against the wall, her body trembling. "I saw the Queen smile," she murmured, eyes half closed. "Even when the king breathed again, she looked afraid." Her mother's eyes widened. "Liora, stop. Please stop talking about them. You've brought enough danger upon us." "I only wanted to help," Liora whispered. "He didn't deserve to die like that." Her mother's voice cracked, tears sliding down her face. "You think they care what you wanted?" she hissed in a whisper. "To them, we're less than wolf's breath. You gave them reason to crush you." Silence. Only the soft hum of dripping water filled the air. Liora's body curled inward. The chains clinked as she hugged her knees to her chest. Her head throbbed with exhaustion. The glow of her gift was gone, but she could still feel it flickering weakly inside her chest, a heartbeat that refused to die. "Mother," she whispered after a long moment, "do you ever think the gods make mistakes?" Her mother didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and gently stroked Liora's hair, her voice trembling as she whispered, "The gods made Omegas to bow, not to burn bright, and every time one forgets that, the world reminds her." Liora's eyes blurred with tears, her lashes wet. "Then why give me light if I was meant to live in the dark?" Her mother looked away. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I pray the light dies before it kills you." From far above, a cheer rose, a deep, rolling sound that made the stone tremble. The Alpha King had awakened. The kingdom rejoiced. Down below, in the cold and silence, the true saviour of the king closed her eyes against the echo of her own chains. And for the first time, she wished the light inside her would fade. He came back to the world like a man surfacing from drowning, gasping, disoriented, each breath a small victory. The ceiling above him was carved wolves and crowns, familiar as a remembered war cry. His limbs felt leaden, his throat raw. A bitter tang lingered at the back of his mouth, iron and something darker, like poison that had passed and nearly taken him. A soft rustle at the bedside pulled his eyes open. Queen Verean sat with her hands folded, every tremor of grief sculpted into elegance. Her black veil lay to one side, and she let her fingers brush his cheek with painstaking tenderness. Kael, she whispered, voice smooth as silk. You suffered much. Sleep. You are safe now. Her lips formed grief. Her eyes were measured flame. Ryden stood behind her, expression composed enough to be duty. It was treachery at the feast, he said. Mischief in a cup passed among traitors. We acted as quickly as we could. We thought... He bowed his head as if bowed by sorrow. We thought we had lost you. Kael tried to uncoil memory like a tight rope. The feast, laughter, raising a cup. Toasts to the future. He tasted the wine still, that metallic tang that burned at the back of his tongue. He remembered raising the chalice, the toast that turned to a blur, then night and silence. You were poisoned, Verean murmured, the word a silken blade. They tried to steal your life. We fought for you. She tightened her fingers on his wrist, eyes wet with practiced horror. They drank with you, yet only you. Only you fell. He closed his eyes and in the dark a flash surfaced. A hand, small, uncertain, pressed against his lips, a whisper like a bell. A girl, light unfurling against the wound. Live. The image was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving a warmth beneath his ribs that was not quite his. He opened his eyes. The sunbeams through the drape painted Verean's cheekbone gold. Bells rang somewhere far off, victory chimes for a life spared. The palace celebrated, the court declared miracle. But inside Kael the taste of treachery turned and settled. That night, Verean watched his breath in the candlelight and hummed lullabies the court liked to hear. Ryden kept careful silence at the doorway, face calm as carved stone. They moved like actors who had rehearsed grief until it fit. The next day the court lauded Verean as the grieving saviour. They praised Ryden's vigilance. Crowds pressed to the palace gates to bless the alpha who had returned from death. Yet each cheer sounded to Kael like a rustle of paper masks. He moved through the day wrapped in courtesy and ceremonies, answering 100 small talks as if nothing unusual had occurred. Yet whenever the feasting bowl was mentioned, or wine, the metallic ghost ghosted at the edge of his memory. How had the chalice reached him unnoticed? Who had leaned close enough to slip shadow into his drink, sitting in his chambers that night with a quiet, clawing worry? If he had been poisoned, then the hands that set the cup in motion still moved free in his court. If memory had been stolen from him, then lies could be laid in its place with ease. Sleep came again, and with it another fragment, a candle flare of a tiled market, an old man's cough, a small palm glowing like a court star. The voice came again, closer. You are not finished. It was not the voice of a god. It was nearer, soft, human. The torches burned low that night, thin, wavering flames that cast long, trembling shadows along the stone corridor. The palace slept above in silks and safety, but beneath it, the dungeon breathed like something alive. Wet walls, iron air, and the slow drip of unseen water. Kael moved through the passage in silence, his cloak drawn close. He had dismissed his guards hours ago, claiming fatigue. Only one followed now. An old servant, grey and bent, whose family had served the crown since before Kael's birth. His name was Darren, a man who remembered truth long after others had learned to fear it. Your Majesty, Darren whispered, glancing over his shoulder, if the Queen learns you've come here. Kael halted, voice low and sharp. She will not. The old man hesitated, torchlight flickering across his face. Then, as if something greater than fear compelled him, he said softly, There's talk, my king, of a girl, an Omega, accused of witchcraft and blasphemy. They say she defied the Queen, that she brought light where death had already claimed you. Kael's breath caught, so slight it was nearly lost in the echo. The girl? Darren nodded. They call her Liora Valia. She and her mother await execution. I see, Kael murmured, deep in thoughts. Kael turned to the window. The courtyard below shimmered with wet cobblestones. I want them brought to me, he said. The girl and her mother. My king! I said brought, Kael repeated, voice low but unyielding. I will hear her so-called treason myself. If she speaks nonsense, I'll know it. And if she does not, he trailed off, jaw tightening, then I'll know that too. The throne room smelled of rain and incense. Gold light filtered through the high glass windows, painting the marble floor in fractured brilliance. The nobles lined the walls in uneasy silence. At the far end of the hall, King Kael sat upon his throne, a wolf carved from obsidian and silver, its eyes catching every glimmer of light. He looked every bit the returned alpha, tall, severe, his crown glinting like a halo turned to steel. But beneath that calm mask, his pulse thrummed with unrest. He had seen her once in the dungeon, just a fleeting moment, and something inside him had stirred. Now, as the guards dragged her in, chains clinking softly, that same unbidden warmth rushed through him again. Liora Valea. The Omega stood proud despite the manacles on her wrists. Her dress was torn, midnight hair unkempt, a pale, serene beauty dirtied from mud and dungeons. But there was a strange dignity in the way she carried herself, as though her chains were merely another kind of crown. Her mother was not with her. Kael had ordered only the girl be brought. Whispers broke through the silence. That's her, the witch who claimed to raise the dead. An Omega should not even breathe before the king. The priestess cleared her throat. The prisoner Liora Valea, accused of treason, blasphemy, and false prophecy. Kael's gaze fixed on her. Raise your head. Liora did, slowly, deliberately. When her eyes met his, the room seemed to still. She looked at him not as a king, not as a god returned, but as a man. Kael's fingers tightened on the armrest. His throat felt dry. There was something in her eyes, something that remembered him. Queen Verean stood to his right, her expression soft with feigned worry. Ryden to his left, sharp-eyed and waiting. Do you understand the weight of your accusations? Kael asked. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. You accused your queen and my beta of treason and murder, and now you stand before me, alive, because I chose to let you speak. Liora's voice, when it came, was clear and quiet. I understand, Your Majesty. Then speak. Tell me why I shouldn't have your head for blasphemy. The hall buzzed. Nobles whispering, expecting her to fall to her knees. But she didn't. Instead, she took a single step forward, chains dragging faintly against the marble. You shouldn't kill me, she said, because you almost died. But I kissed you back to life. Gasps rippled through the court. Verean's face froze, just for an instant. Ryden's eyes flicked toward her, a warning. Kael's breath caught. He sat straighter, his jaw tight. What did you say? Liora met his gaze unflinching. You drank from the poisoned chalice. You fell before the feast was done. They thought you gone, but I knew your breath still lingered. Faint, hidden. I used my gift to call you back. Gift. Ryden's voice cut through the air like a blade. You admit witchcraft, then? Her eyes snapped to him, cold fire beneath the calm. If the gods gave me the power to heal, then let them judge whether it is witchcraft or grace. Murmurs surged again, some fearful, some awed. Kael raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze didn't leave her. If what you say is true, how did you know of it? I heard them, she said simply. Behind the tapestry, the queen and your beta, and the maid who poured your wine. Every breath in the hall stilled. Verean's hand trembled as she stepped forward. My king, she said softly. This is madness. She seeks to drive a wedge between us. She lies. But Kael's attention didn't waver. Bring the maid, he said. Ryden's tone was measured. The maid in question took her life the morning after your collapse, Majesty. Convenient. Too convenient. Kael's knuckles whitened on the throne. And yet, this girl still breathes. She is dangerous, Verean said quickly, her voice rising. You can feel her, can't you? She twists the air. She plays with your mind. You mustn't— Enough! Kael's voice thundered through the hall. The sound of it echoed against marble, silencing even the rain. He rose slowly. The crowd bowed instinctively. His steps were heavy as he descended the dais until he stood before her. The guards shifted uneasily. Kael studied her face, the trembling lip she tried to still, the flecks of gold in her grey eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Faith. He reached out, fingertips brushing the chain around her wrist. Tell me, he said quietly, so only she could hear. If you truly brought me back, why? Her answer came like a breath. Because I couldn't bear to see light extinguished by greed. Something in his chest gave way, a warmth spreading where doubt had lived. He turned, lifting his gaze to the court. Release her chains. The hall erupted in chaos. My king, this cannot— She'll curse us all. Majesty, she deceives. Veren's voice rose above them all, shrill and panicked. Kael, you cannot trust her. He turned to her then, eyes sharp as stormlight. And why not, my queen? Are you afraid she speaks truth? The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. Veren froze, mask cracking for the first time. Ryden's jaw tightened. Liora's chains hit the marble floor with a metallic echo that rang through every heart in the room. Kael looked at Liora again. You will remain within the palace, he said. Under guard and severe watch. I have questions only you can answer. Then, without looking at his queen or his beta, he ascended the dais once more, the words heavy and final. Let no one harm her. On my command, her life is mine. Verean's nails dug deep into her palms. Ryden's shadow stretched long beneath the throne. And across the hall, Liora lifted her freed wrists and met the king's gaze. For the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to breathe. Because the king's eyes, though clouded by confusion, now held a spark of memory, a flicker of recognition, the first crack in the lies that had chained them both. Night had fallen over the palace, cloaking its silver towers in quiet shadows. The corridors were still, save for the soft scratching of a quill against parchment. Kael sat alone in his study, the scent of burning cedar heavy in the air. Scrolls lay open before him, unread. His mind had drifted far from treaties and decrees. He could still hear her voice, that trembling yet defiant whisper from the throne room. You almost died, but I kissed you back to life. He exhaled slowly, staring into the flickering candlelight, as though it might reveal what his memory refused to. The door opened without a knock. Queen Verean stepped in, her silken gown trailing behind her like liquid dusk. Her face was composed, too composed, but her eyes gleamed with heat. My king, she began softly, though her voice quivered with restrained anger. You humiliated me today. Before the court, before the nobles. You made it seem as though you believed that Omega's filth. Kael didn't look up. Did I? She moved closer, her perfume filling the room, sweet, cloying, suffocating. You did, she said, her tone sharpening. The way you looked at her, the way you spoke to me. You made me small, Kael, as though her words carried more weight than mine. Still, he wrote. The only sound between them was the slow drag of ink across paper. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, too calm. Judging from the maid's death, and everything surrounding it, he said, setting down the quill. I'd be lying if I said I didn't for a moment, wonder if she spoke truth. Veren's breath hitched. She turned her face away, dabbing at non-existent tears. You wound me, my love, she whispered, her shoulders trembling. I have been nothing but loyal, and yet you cast me aside for a girl who smells of earth and ash. Kael ignored the tears. He had seen her cry before, always when cornered. He turned back to his papers. Then her next words stilled his hand. "Tell me, Kael," she said softly, her voice dripping with venom and pain. "Is this distance between us because I am not your mate, or is it because you haven't found her?" Silence. For a long, tense moment, Kael didn't move. Then, slowly, he rose from his chair. The candlelight caught the edge of his jaw, his expression unreadable as he crossed the room. When he stopped before her, the air between them felt sharp enough to cut. "Do not speak of it again," he said quietly, his voice threaded with warning. Verean's composure cracked. "Why, Kael?" she shouted suddenly, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Why do you refuse to love me? Why must I stand beside a man whose heart I cannot reach?" Kael's eyes softened, not with affection, but with something deeper. He lifted his hands, cupping her face gently. "Because," he said, his voice low, almost mournful, "I do not recognize you anymore." Her breath caught, tears freezing in her eyes. Kael stepped back, his touch falling away like a severed vow. Without another word, he turned and walked past her, the sound of his boots echoing through the chamber. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Verean stood alone in the dim light, her trembling lips twisting into a bitter, broken smile. "Then you will," she whispered to the empty room, voice dark with resolve. "When you're on your knees, you will." They met in the Queen's private chamber, where tapestries swallowed sound and the candles burned low, soft light painting Verean's face in honeyed gold. The air smelled of jasmine and old silk. Ryden waited by the window, a dark silhouette until she entered, Storm in a gown. "You heard him," Verean said the moment the door closed, voice thin with fury. She crossed the room in slow, angry steps, each movement a blade. "He humiliated me today, before the court, before the nobles. He treated me as if I were the accused, as if I had poisoned him. I will not be humiliated twice." Ryden folded his hands, measured as ever. "You called me at night. Tell me plainly, what do you intend?" She stopped so close he could feel the heat of her. "Take him down," she said, words low and dangerous. "Or take the Omega. Either way, he must not be allowed to grow attached. If he remembers her," her voice cracked and narrowed on the last word, "if he finds his mate, I lose him utterly." Ryden's brow knit. "Poison again would be reckless. He's careful now. Every cup is watched, every servant tested. If he refuses the toast, if something interrupts, the plan dies. The treaty feast is watched by allied packs. There are too many eyes." Verean's laugh was thin, without humour. "And yet it is the only clean way." She drew a slow breath. "At the treaty they will demand a public toast. He will raise his cup before kings and elders. He cannot refuse that. It is the occasion where a single sip is expected. There the act is invisible. No knife, no scene." Her fingers flexed, as if squeezing the thought into flesh. "We don't need to touch him. We need only make sure the chalice is touched in the right hands." Ryden's voice was careful. "There are variables, guards, strangers. The goddess knows what interruptions. And the Omega. If she stays near him, she might warn him again." Verean's eyes flashed, fierce and cold. "Then she must not stay near him. I have waited for this chance for years, years of being the mate in name alone, of seeing him turn his mercy to others, of watching him give his strength where it should not be given. If I cannot have his heart, then he shall not know peace. I would rather see him burn than watch him kneel to another." She leaned in, close enough he could see the hunger in her pupils. "There's another reason we must move now," she whispered, voice small and urgent. "Before the mating ceremony." The words fell like a stone. "If he finds his mate at that rite, everything changes. The bond will root, stronger than any law or decree. I can't bear the thought of him honouring another while I stand by. We must finish this before the moon chooses him for someone else." Ryden felt the plan rearrange itself around that deadline. Power was one thing, timing was everything. He imagined the throne empty, the council pliant, the Pax bending beneath a new order, if they acted before the world rearranged itself around a new pair. Verean reached up, cupping his face with gloved fingers. Her touch was both command and seduction. She pressed her lips to his, softness sealing cruelty. "Think of what waits for us once he's gone," she murmured against him. "The Pax will bend. The council will fear. You will step out from his shadow." The palace was quiet when his messenger found her. By the time Liora climbed the last staircase to the king's private wing, the torches had burned low, and the air smelled faintly of cedar smoke and rain. She hesitated before the heavy door, unsure whether to knock, then it opened on its own. Kael stood there, dressed down for once, his crown set aside, his sleeves rolled. The firelight painted him in bronze and shadow. He looked less like the Alpha King, and more like a man who hadn't slept in days. "You sent for me, Your Majesty." Her voice was soft, careful. Kael's gaze met hers, and for a heartbeat he said nothing. He didn't mean to notice it, the way the air around her carried something warm and green, like crushed herbs and sunlight after rain. It wasn't perfume. It was her. He gestured toward the seat across from him. "Sit, Liora." She obeyed, her chains long gone now, but her posture still cautious, as though freedom was something she could lose with a breath. Kael studied her for a while. The silence between them was strange, not cold, but new. He'd spoken to nobles and warriors, but never like this. Never just to know someone. "Tell me," he began at last, "how long have you known about your gift?" Liora blinked, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "Since I was a child, I think, but I didn't understand it until the day in the market." "The old man who collapsed," Kael said quietly. He remembered Darren's tale. She nodded. "He called it a blessing, said it came from the Verean line, though I never knew what that meant. After that, I learned to hide it. Power draws danger when it belongs to the wrong kind of blood." Kael's eyes darkened. "You mean Omega blood?" She smiled faintly. "That's what they call it." He leaned back, thoughtful. "And you heal through touch." "Through intent," she corrected softly. "The touch only gives it direction, but it drains me every time. I don't think it was ever meant for saving kings." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, his first real smile in what felt like ages. Then it was a reckless thing to do. Liora tilted her head. "Perhaps, but sometimes reckless things are the right ones." A soft crackle from the fire filled the silence that followed. Kael poured water from a silver jug into 2 cups, offering one to her. She hesitated again out of habit, then took it. Their fingers brushed, barely, and he felt the ghost of that warmth again, running up his arm. "You're not what I expected," he said after a long pause. "And what did you expect, my king?" He looked into the flames. "Someone afraid, someone bitter. But you—" He stopped, searching for the word. "You still look at the world as if it can be healed." Her eyes softened. "Because it can. If the ones who break it learn to stop pretending they're whole." Kael looked at her then, not at her torn hem or calloused hands, but at the quiet strength that lived behind her calm. The way her voice steadied him more than 1,000 words from his counsel ever could. For a while neither spoke. The fire murmured, the rain outside softened to a whisper. Finally, Kael said, almost to himself, "It's strange. I've ruled armies, fought wars, commanded silence. But I find peace in your voice." Liora lowered her gaze, hiding a small, startled smile. "Then perhaps you've simply forgotten what peace sounds like." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. The air between them changed, softer, unguarded, alive. When he rose to escort her to the door, she stood too, bowing lightly, but before she could step away, he spoke again, quieter this time. "Liora." She looked up. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me that the world still breathes." And though she said nothing, her smile, gentle and shy, was answer enough. When the door closed behind her, Kael found the scent of her still lingered, warm, living, faintly sweet. Morning light spilled across the marble floors of the council hall, warm and golden, catching the silver crests on the warriors' uniforms and the polished edge of Kael's crown. The chamber was filled, nobles, guards, servants lining the walls, and at the centre the king's advisers seated around the long obsidian table. Kael stood at the head of it all, his expression calm but firm. He glanced at the parchment in his hand before continuing. "After speaking with Alpha Ryden of the neighbouring Crescent Fangpack, there's been a small adjustment to the treaty plans." A murmur rippled through the room, quickly dying under his raised hand. "The treaty feast will no longer be held this moon," Kael said. "It will take place after the mating moon ceremony. Alpha Ryden believes it would allow his people more time to prepare properly, without inconvenience or haste." Heads nodded. Some looked relieved, others merely curious. "Until then," Kael continued, "all arrangements and provisions for the ceremony will proceed as planned. I expect full cooperation from every division. No delay, no excuses." A few advisers exchanged glances, whispering quietly. But it was Verean's reaction that drew quiet attention. From her seat beside the throne she smiled faintly, though her hand tightened around her goblet. The mating moon ceremony. So it was coming sooner than she'd hoped. Her mind flicked back to the previous night, to her whispered promise to the beta that they had to act before that night arrived, before Kael found the one fate had written for him. Now, the ticking clock had begun to beat louder in her chest. Kael's gaze swept over the room once more. "If there are no objections, we are adjourned." Everyone rose in respect. The king turned, his robe trailing softly behind him as he left the hall. But behind him, Verean's eyes followed in silence, burning with a resolve that tightened like a coil beneath her calm smile. The clock was ticking faster now, and if fate was hurrying toward Kael's true mate, then Verean would have to strike first. It had been a month since the night the palace nearly fell silent with fear, a month since Liora's hands had pulled the king back from the brink, and since then, peace had wrapped the castle in a fragile calm. No one spoke of the attack anymore. The guards patrolled in heavier silence and the council walked on eggshells. Kael had begun to send for her often, sometimes under the excuse of needing reports on his recovery, other times for reasons he never explained. Liora always came, curious and cautious. When she entered, he always looked up, his eyes trailing briefly over her before he schooled his face into calm. And whenever her voice filled the room, even about the smallest things, how the garden herbs grew better near the fountain, or how she'd once stitched dresses for the village girls, he found himself listening as if every word mattered. Outside those doors, however, Verean seethed. Each time she caught a glimpse of Liora walking toward Kael's study with that quiet grace, a sneer curved her lips. Her heels clicked sharp and angry against the marble floors, her thoughts venomous. She had stood beside Kael long before this little healer appeared, and she refused to be overshadowed by an Omega with gentle hands and a soft voice. That evening, the rain had just begun to fall when Kael summoned Liora again. The fire in his study was low, painting the walls in muted gold. Liora entered quietly, smoothing her plain dress as she bowed. "You sent for me, my king." Kael looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable but lighter than usual. "Yes. Sit with me a while." She obeyed, settling opposite him as the rain tapped gently against the windows. He didn't ask her about herbs this time or about her healing. Instead, his gaze lingered on her in thoughtful silence. After a while, he leaned back slightly, one corner of his mouth lifting. "Liora." She looked up. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Do you sing?" Her brows rose in surprise. Sing? Yes, he said, tone faintly teasing. I've been told every healer of Valea carried not just light in their hands but music in their throats. Is that true? Liora gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. I used to hum to calm the little ones at the orphanage, but I wouldn't call that singing, Your Majesty. Still, Kael said, leaning forward, his eyes glinting with quiet amusement. Hum for me, then. She blinked. Now? Now. Liora smiled awkwardly, her fingers fidgeting on her lap. I don't really... Please, he said, his voice lower this time, gentle, but carrying the weight of something sincere. Sing for me. Anything at all. The room seemed to still at his tone. For a heartbeat, she only stared at him, startled. No one had ever asked her that way before. Not as a command, but a request. Finally, she nodded. All right. She drew a small breath and began softly. Her voice was light, fragile at first, like wind moving through trees, but soon it steadied, pure and hauntingly beautiful. It filled the corners of the room, threading between the crackle of the fire and the patter of rain. Kael said nothing. He only listened, his gaze fixed on her as though afraid to blink and break the spell. The sound was more than melody, it carried warmth, a quiet ache, something old and human and deeply soothing. When she finished, silence stretched. Then Kael spoke quietly. Beautiful. Colour rose to her cheeks. You're kind, my king. He gave a faint smile. Kind? No, I'm merely honest. Their eyes met, and something wordless passed between them. A quiet understanding neither could name. And though neither spoke of it, the walls of the king's study began to remember her laughter, the echo of her song, and the way his voice softened whenever she entered the room. The queen's cloak fluttered softly as she slipped through the shadowed paths of the lower city, her hood drawn low to hide her face. The palace towers loomed far behind her now, their silver spires blurred by mist. Here, in the crowded heart of the market, the air smelled of earth, smoke, and secrets. She walked past stalls of herbs and trinkets until she reached a narrow alley that twisted between two shuttered shops. At the end of it stood a small tent, faded red, with strange runes painted along its seams. A single lantern burned outside, its light dim and flickering. Verean pushed aside the curtain and stepped inside. The air was heavy with incense and the crackle of burning sage. Behind a low table sat the seer, an old woman with hair white as frost, her eyes hidden beneath a sheer veil. She did not look up when Verean entered. You seek answers you already fear, the old woman murmured. Verean's breath caught. You've been expecting me, then? The seer's lips curved faintly. The wind that carries your scent carries your anger too, my queen. The spirits hear even what you whisper to yourself. Verean stepped closer, lowering her voice. I need to know if he'll find her, if Kael's mate will be revealed at the coming ceremony. At that, the seer lifted her veiled face. Her voice deepened, strange and echoing, like many voices speaking as one. The bond of the moon cannot be seen, only felt. No seer, no spell, no shadow can unveil it before its time. When it comes, it will burn through every lie and every chain. Verean's jaw tensed. There must be a way, she hissed. Some charm, some potion, something to make him forget. The seer shook her head slowly. To tamper with what the moon marks is to curse yourself, my queen. You cannot stop destiny, only delay it. And sometimes... She leaned forward slightly. The longer you delay it, the harsher its return. Verean's eyes darkened with quiet rage. Then destiny will have to find another path, she said coldly, turning away. The seer said nothing as the queen pushed through the tent's curtain and disappeared into the misty market. But as the wind stirred the incense smoke, the old woman whispered softly to the air, You can't steal what was never meant for you, child. And the moon always collects her debt. The palace hummed softly with preparation. Silks were being dyed, banners unfurled, and trays of silver polished until they gleamed like mirrors. The talk in the servants' quarters had changed, No longer whispers of the Omega girl who had defied the queen, but the upcoming mating moon ceremony. In the laundry hall, laughter rippled through the women as they folded linens and arranged garlands. "They say the moon's glow will be strongest this year," one of the maids said dreamily. "And whoever is fated will feel the pull before the night ends," another replied, eyes wide with wonder. "I can't wait to see who the king's mate will be," a younger servant added with a giggle. "Imagine standing beside him beneath that silver light." Their voices softened when Liora entered with a bundle of clean sheets. The girls glanced at each other, unsure whether to speak, but Liora only smiled faintly. "It must be a beautiful thing," she said quietly, "to find the one the moon herself chose." Her tone was calm, but inside her chest ached with something she couldn't name. The others, sensing the weight in her voice, quickly turned the talk back to their chores. Yet, as Liora hung the linens by the window, she caught herself staring out toward the palace gardens, toward the place where Kael often walked at dusk. That night, when the work was done and the halls had gone quiet, she returned to her small quarters at the far end of the servants' wing. Her mother, Verean, was there by the lamp, mending a torn cloak with slow, careful stitches. "Long day?" her mother asked softly without looking up. Liora nodded, sinking beside her. "Everyone's talking about the ceremony," she murmured. "The moon, the fates, the bond. They speak of it like it's the answer to everything." Verean smiled faintly. "For some, it is. For others, it's just another night of waiting." Liora leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "Do you think the moon marks everyone? Even us, Omegas?" Her mother's hands paused mid-stitch. "The moon doesn't see rank, my heart. Only truth, and truth always finds its way, even if it walks through shadows first." For a while, neither spoke. The room was quiet save for the faint chirp of crickets outside and the whisper of thread through cloth. Finally, Verean set her work aside and brushed a strand of hair from Liora's face. "You've been carrying too much inside," she said softly. "Whatever it is, don't let it harden you. The world already has enough of that." Liora smiled, small, tired, but genuine. "I won't." Her mother pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Good. Then rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough." As the lamp dimmed and the world outside sank into silver darkness, Liora lay awake for a while, listening to the steady rhythm of her mother's breathing. Somewhere beyond the walls, the king's footsteps echoed faintly down the marble corridors. And though she didn't understand why, her heart seemed to follow the sound. Quiet, steady, and impossibly drawn. The moon hung low that night, silver light spilling across the stone balcony like water. Inside the king's chambers, the air was thick with the scent of oak wine and quiet. Kael sat by the fire, cloak loosened, his crown resting on the nearby table. The goblet in his hand had long gone still. He wasn't drinking anymore, only staring into the embers as if searching for answers in their restless glow. The door creaked softly. "Your Majesty," came a familiar voice, low, trembling. Kael didn't look up immediately. He didn't need to. "Vea." Queen Verean stepped in, her silken gown whispering against the marble. She looked at him for a long moment before she spoke, her voice breaking the silence like the faintest crack in glass. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "If you find her, your mate, what happens to me, Kael exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. He looked weary, older than his years. "We've talked about this, Vea." His tone was gentle, almost pleading. "Before I made you my queen, we had an agreement. If I should ever find my mate, you can always choose to remain here, with your power, your seat beside me in my court. But you also knew my Luna would always come first." He stood, setting the goblet down, the firelight caught in his eyes, softening them. "I'm sorry, Vea, truly. But you made the rules. You wanted it this way. Our fathers approved it together." Her jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat the only sound was the fire crackling. Then her voice broke, raw and trembling. "But my feelings for you have changed, Kael." She took a hesitant step forward. "I no longer love you as a friend or as your ally. I love you, deeply. Please, just make me yours." Kael froze. Pain flickered across his face before he stepped closer, his movements slow, careful. He cupped her face gently, brushing away a tear with his thumb. "Vea," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you, in the way I promised I would. You were my best friend long before you were my queen. I swore to care for you, to honour you like a king should, and I have. Gods bear me witness, I have." His gaze softened, sorrow deep in his eyes. "But I told you from the beginning. I could never mate with you. I could never forsake the bond that was written for me. I begged you to understand, and you said you did. You said it was enough, to help me lead, to keep the pack strong, to pray for the day I found my true mate." He paused, searching her eyes. "So tell me, Vea, what changed?" Verean's tears stopped. Her expression shifted, something cold, hard and wounded settling beneath her beauty. She turned her face from his hand, her voice low but sharp as ice. "I love you," she said bitterly. "I always have. Why do you think I wasn't broken when my own mate died? Because I thought, finally, you would see me. You would choose me." Her voice trembled, then steadied with something darker. "But no. Even now, your heart belongs to a shadow, to a woman you haven't even met yet." Kael's brows furrowed, but before he could speak, she whispered, cold and quiet enough to send a chill through him. "If I can't have you, Kael, no one can." The fire popped. Then she turned and walked out, her gown trailing behind her like spilled ink, the door closing with a soft finality that made the chamber feel emptier than before. Kael stood there for a long while, staring at the door, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes drifting back to the fire. The flames no longer looked like light, only quiet, consuming heat. And for the first time that night, the Alpha King felt something he hadn't in years: dread. The night of the mating ceremony shimmered with silver and fire. Moonlight poured through the high glass domes of the great hall, bathing everyone in its sacred glow. Every pack in the kingdom had gathered, alphas, betas, and omegas alike, dressed in silk, scent, and anticipation. The drums of the old wolves beat low and steady, echoing with the rhythm of the earth itself. It was a night of destiny. Liora moved among the servants, her head bowed, her heart steady. Her hands trembled only slightly as she lifted trays of crystal goblets and wine. The scent of roses and pine filled the air. Every face was bright with hope, laughter, and yearning. It was the night the moon would whisper to every heart who it truly belonged to. Above them all sat King Kael. Cloaked in black and silver, his crown catching the moon's light, he looked every bit the untouchable alpha, the ruler of wolves, power and grace bound into one. But his eyes, they searched the room, restless, unquiet. Somewhere deep inside him something stirred. The moon rose higher. Its light turned the hall to liquid silver. A soft tremor moved through the crowd, a collective shiver as the pull began. One by one, hearts found their other half. A warrior gasped. A noblewoman cried. Everywhere the air thickened with the scent of awakening bonds. Then Kael felt it. A pulse. Deep and electric, like his soul had just remembered something ancient. He inhaled sharply. There, amidst the servants, was a scent he knew too well. Soft, clean, wild, like rain meeting sunlight. His head turned before he could stop himself. Liora. She stood frozen across the room, her tray trembling in her hands. Her breath came shallow, her eyes wide. She could feel it too, something warm and invisible tugging at her, pulling her toward him, wrapping around her like unseen silk. Every sound in the room faded. It was just them. Kael rose slowly, never breaking her gaze. The hall seemed to hold its breath as he descended the steps, each footfall echoing in the quiet like the beat of a great heart. Liora's tray slipped from her hands, cups shattering softly against the floor, but she couldn't move, not even to pick them up. Her eyes shimmered with disbelief, with something that felt like both fear and wonder. When he finally reached her, Kael stopped just a breath away. His scent enveloped her, rich, familiar, overwhelming. For a moment, he only looked at her, his hand lifting as though he feared she might vanish if he touched her too quickly. Then, with a voice that rumbled low from his chest, his wolf breaking through, he growled, deep, possessive and tender all at once. Mine. The word rolled through the hall, ancient and primal, the sound of fate claiming what it had written long ago. Liora's lips parted, her heart racing. The world tilted. Every gaze turned toward them, but neither of them noticed. Kael reached out, his hands finding her face, his thumbs brushing the tears she didn't know had fallen. His eyes glowed faintly gold, his wolf spirit flickering in them like dawn light, and with a voice softer than breath, reverent and raw, he whispered, My Liora, my mate, my Luna, I've finally found you. The moon outside flared brighter, as if blessing the union. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall, but all Kael heard was her heartbeat, fast, alive, calling to his. Liora stood trembling, her breath breaking into a quiet laugh that sounded like the first day of spring. When his forehead rested against hers, everything else, every fear, every lie, every shadow, melted away. The Alpha King had found his light, and the servant girl who once saved him had just become the heartbeat of his kingdom. The night had fallen quiet, save for the distant echoes of drums still humming from the great hall. The scent of wine and roasted meat still lingered faintly through the corridors, carried on the cold breath of midnight. But in the high tower where Verean stayed, there was only silence, and the sound of her ring clinking against her goblet as she turned it between her fingers, again and again. The door creaked open. Ryden stepped in without knocking. His steps were heavy, his eyes weary but restless, the kind that carried more confusion than joy. I didn't see you at the ceremony, he said, his voice breaking the stillness like a dull blade. Verean didn't look up. I wasn't needed. Ryden gave a faint chuckle, the kind that hides bitterness. You missed quite a sight. Turns out the moon has a sense of humour. He paused, his lips curling into something almost like a smile, though his eyes were hollow. It seems I didn't find my mate after all. Verean's fingers stilled around the goblet. For the first time, her eyes lifted, sharp and knowing, though she said nothing. Ryden stepped closer. But Kael did. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the air itself drew back. Verean's gaze drifted to the window, where the moon still glowed with quiet arrogance, hanging over the forest like an uninvited witness. She didn't speak. She didn't even blink. Her face was pale, beautiful and still, a porcelain mask that betrayed nothing. Ryden, restless, kept talking. Funny, isn't it? All that fuss and the servant girl ends up as the Luna. The gods really do play strange games. He chuckled again, but it died quickly when he saw her expression, or rather, the absence of one. He hesitated, then added, You do realise this changes things, don't you? You don't hold as much power as before. Not with her in his arms now. The court's already whispering. Verean didn't look at him. Her eyes were still fixed somewhere far away. Not on him, not even in the room. Just nowhere. Ryden shifted uneasily. So, what do we do now? At that, she finally turned to him. Her gaze was slow, deliberate, and when it landed on him, it was ice, silent, cold, final. Leave my chambers, she said quietly. Her tone wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It carried enough weight to end a war. Ryden blinked, taken aback, but he nodded slowly and turned for the door. His hand was on the handle when he stopped, glancing back. "Oh, by the way," he said almost carelessly, "everyone's already preparing to celebrate the new Luna. 1 week from now." He waited, hoping for a reaction, a word, a glare, anything, but Verean said nothing. She only turned back to the window, her expression unreadable. And for a moment she looked almost ethereal beneath the moonlight, the queen who had everything, and now nothing. Ryden sighed and left. The door clicked shut, and for a long, long while, Verean didn't move. Only when the last echo of his footsteps faded did her lips part, not in words but in a quiet, broken breath that trembled between rage and heartbreak. The moonlight brushed her face softly as if mocking her. "Liora," she whispered under her breath, not with jealousy, but with a calm, dangerous quiet. Then she turned toward her mirror and stared at her reflection until her tears burned away. The queen's heart had cracked, but her resolve was now colder than the moon itself. The night sky blazed with silver light, the full moon watching proudly over the grandest celebration the palace had seen in years. Music floated through the air, strings, flutes, laughter, the scent of roses and honey wine thick around the hall. Tonight was the night the pack welcomed its new Luna, Liora. The lowly Omega, once invisible among servants, now stood before them, draped in flowing white silk that shimmered like starlight. Her hair, loosely curled, caught the flicker of torchlight, her eyes soft but bright with disbelief. She looked both fragile and divine, like a prayer come alive. Kael stood beside her, tall, composed, but his gaze never strayed far from her face. There was warmth in his eyes, deep, certain, the kind that told everyone watching that the Alpha had found his peace. He raised his goblet, his voice steady, strong. "To my Luna," he said, and the crowd echoed him, their voices a single chorus. "To love chosen by the moon itself." Cheers filled the room, glasses clinking, music swelling once more. Liora smiled shyly, her heart thundering as Kael leaned closer, whispering something only she could hear. Whatever it was made her laugh, a sound so pure that even the hardest warriors found themselves smiling. They danced together, unhurried, graceful, as though they had known each other for centuries, souls that had found their missing halves. Every eye in the room watched them, the Alpha and his Luna, perfection made flesh. But then, the grand doors creaked open. The music faltered. Whispers rippled through the hall like a sudden chill. And there she was, Queen Verean. Or not anymore. Dressed in a gown of midnight, sleek, lethal, every curve and fold a weapon. Black jewels dripped from her ears, and her lips were painted the colour of sin. But what stilled every voice, what froze even the musician's mid-note, was the smile on her face. That smile. It was wide, beautiful, and utterly unreadable. The torchlight caught in her eyes as she stepped into the hall, each click of her heel echoing through the silence. Kael's hand instinctively tightened around Liora's waist. Liora's breath hitched, though she stood her ground. All around them, courtiers and nobles exchanged uncertain glances, waiting, watching. Verean paused at the centre of the room, her gaze sweeping across the crowd before landing squarely on Kael and his Luna. Her smile didn't fade. In fact, it grew just a little wider. "Why did it suddenly get so quiet?" she asked softly, her tone honeyed, playful even. "It's a celebration, isn't it?" The silence stretched taut, the air heavy enough to choke on. The music hesitated, then resumed, faltering but obedient. But the moment had shifted. The joy, once golden, now trembled under something unseen, a darkness wrapped in silk and perfume. She walked forward slowly, her heels echoing against the marble floor. When she reached the centre of the hall, her eyes swept the crowd, and finally rested on Kael. "What a sight," she said softly, her tone sugar and poison all at once. "The mighty Alpha King and his beloved Luna, The moon goddess must be so proud. A few nobles lowered their heads. Some looked away. She raised her glass in mock salute. To fate, she said. To love. To the kind of happiness that makes even gods jealous. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then she walked toward Kael, slowly, deliberately, until she stood close enough that only he could hear her whisper. "I told you," she murmured, voice trembling with both sorrow and venom. "If I can't have you, no one can." Kael's breath stilled. He didn't move, but his hand instinctively tightened around Liora's waist, drawing her closer to him. His body tensed, the air around him thickening with quiet vigilance. He knew Verean too well. The queen turned, her eyes glistening with tears that caught the light like broken glass. She began to walk away, then paused beside one of the royal warriors. Her hand swiftly dragged out the dagger at his waist. Then, lightning. In a blur of black silk, Verean turned and lunged forward with the dagger, her face twisted with anguish. Gasps and shouts filled the air, but before anyone could reach them. Kael moved. He pulled Liora behind him just as the blade plunged forward. The sound of it, that sharp, cruel sound, cut through the music and screams alike. Verean's eyes widened. The dagger was buried in Kael's side. The world seemed to stop. Her hand trembled as she let go, the weapon clattering to the marble. "No, no, I didn't—" Her voice broke, cracking like glass underfoot. "I didn't mean to, Kael—" Kael staggered slightly but stayed on his feet, his hand pressing to the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked at her, not with hatred but something far heavier. "How could you, Vea?" he asked quietly, his voice raw. "After everything?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stepped back, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The room erupted. Warriors rushing forward, nobles screaming, healers called in panic. Liora stood frozen, pale as moonlight, tears spilling down her face as she reached for him. Kael's voice thundered through the hall, silencing all. "Guards!" Every sound died. His jaw tightened, blood still dripping down his side. His eyes never left Verean's as he gave the command, strong, final, heartbroken. "Take her away!" Verean didn't fight as the guards seized her. Her eyes stayed locked on his, wide with disbelief, until she was dragged from the hall, her crown falling from her hair and rolling across the marble floor. The sound of it echoed long after she was gone. Liora dropped to her knees beside Kael, trembling, her hands pressing over his wound. "Kael," she whispered, voice shaking. He looked at her, and even through the pain, even through the blood, he managed a faint, reassuring smile. "I told you," he whispered hoarsely. "No one will ever harm you. Not while I still breathe." Then his eyes fluttered, and the room descended into chaos once more. Days passed, and the kingdom held its breath. The palace that once hummed with music now echoed only with whispers. Healers had worked night and day tending to their king. The wound had been deep, but Kael was stronger than most men, stronger than fate itself, some said. Slowly, painfully, he healed. When at last he rose from his bed, the entire court was summoned. The throne room was filled with the heavy silence of reckoning. The air itself seemed to bow beneath the weight of what was about to unfold. Kael entered, tall and composed, his side still bandaged beneath the dark folds of his royal tunic. Liora stood quietly at his right, no longer the timid Omega, but the Luna whose calm presence commanded reverence. And before them knelt Verean. Gone was the proud queen. Her crimson hair hung loose and dull, her dress simple and torn. Chains circled her wrists, honeyed skin bruised, a cruel echo of the crown she had once worn. Yet even in ruin there was a faint trace of the woman she had been, fierce, beautiful, and broken. Kael's gaze was cold, but not cruel. His voice, when he spoke, carried through the chamber like steel, wrapped in sorrow. "Verean of House Draen," he said, "you stand accused of high treason, of attempted murder against your king, and of violating the sacred bond between Alpha and Pack." Whispers rippled through the nobles, but Kael raised a hand and the silence returned. "By the laws of the crown," he continued, "your punishment is death." The words struck like thunder. Verean flinched, but she didn't cry. She simply bowed her head, as though she had already expected this ending. Then, from among the council, an elder rose, an aging man with eyes as weary as the years behind him. His voice trembled as he spoke. "My king, she is my daughter." A hush fell over the court. He stepped forward, kneeling low before Kael. "She has sinned, yes, but she has also served this kingdom faithfully all her life. I beg you, Majesty, by the memory of what was once friendship and peace between our houses, show her mercy." Kael was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes hard. Liora placed a gentle hand on his arm, not to sway his judgment, but to remind him of compassion. At last he rose from the throne and descended the dais until he stood before Verean. "You took my trust," he said quietly. "My peace, my blood." Her tears fell, but she didn't look up. "You should have been my sister in loyalty," Kael continued. "Instead, you chose envy. And still, I will not let your father's loyalty die for your sins." He turned slightly, his voice steady but final. "By mercy of the crown, Verean Draen is stripped of her title, her name, and all claims to the throne and the royal house. She shall be sent into exile beyond the frost peaks. Let no house give her shelter, and let no wolf follow her path." Gasps filled the room. Verean's father bowed deeply, tears falling freely. "Thank you, my king." Kael looked at Verean one last time. There was no hatred in his gaze, only the hollow ache of something once cherished, now gone. "Go," he said softly, "and may the moon goddess forgive where I cannot." The guards stepped forward. Chains clinked as they led her away, her figure small beneath the vast light of the throne room. And when the doors closed behind her, a strange silence fell. The kind that comes not from peace, but from the end of something that once had meaning. Liora looked at Kael, her eyes full of quiet understanding. He turned to her, voice low, almost a whisper. "It's over," he said. But even as he spoke, he knew some ghosts linger long after their names are buried. Spring came softly to the kingdom. The snows melted, the rivers sang again, and the castle that once echoed with sorrow now bloomed with laughter. Liora stood on the balcony overlooking the valley, the wind tugging gently at her hair. Below, the courtyard was alive, children running, flowers opening, wolves basking in the new warmth of the sun. Behind her, she heard the quiet steps she had come to recognize even without sight or sound. Kael. He slipped his arms around her waist, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. "You're thinking again," he murmured, the faintest smile in his voice. "Maybe," she teased softly. "It still feels like a dream." He chuckled low. "Then may it never end." For a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with peace, the kind earned through pain and forgiveness. Kael turned her gently to face him. "Do you ever wonder," he said, eyes searching hers, "how everything might have been if you hadn't walked into that banquet hall?" Liora smiled, that small, luminous smile that always disarmed him. "Then the Alpha King would have died, and I would still be dreaming of healing a man I'd never met." Kael brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, and the goddess would still be waiting for her promise to be fulfilled. Their foreheads touched, breath mingling in quiet devotion. "Liora," he whispered, "you saved my life twice, once with your gift and again with your heart." "And you," she replied softly, "gave me a name worth living for." From the gardens below came the sound of music, light and warm, rising toward the night sky where the full moon watched over them like a silent witness. Kael kissed her then, slow, reverent, a vow renewed beneath the moon's glow. The bond between Alpha and Luna shimmered in the air, felt by every wolf in the realm, not of dominance, but of devotion. A union that healed an ancient divide, and as the moon bathed them in silver light, the wind carried the whisper that began it all, soft, eternal. It wasn't power that saved the king, it was love. Author's note: some wounds never truly fade, they just learn how to stop bleeding. Kael and Liora's story wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, and real. But maybe that's what makes it beautiful. Because even after the storms, they chose love. And that choice changed everything. If this story touched you, even a little, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your support keeps these stories alive. Love from Yara.